the Jewish law through the eyes of the Torah. What is charity? What are the obligations? Who can you fulfill it? How can you fulfill it? Who do you give it to? Etc. And before that, we have a little bit of an agenda. The first thing is that I must give a tremendous thanks to the Rabbi Gideon Shlush, and the Shul for their hospitality and partnering with the Center for Return for now several years in the Yeshiva-Lite program. Secondly, I'd like to mention that Center for Return has a way of getting in touch with you. And if we don't get through the first time, you know we're not embarrassed in calling again and again and writing you and emailing you and texting you, etc. So we're going to be doing that about a very, very important thing, and that is the Shabbos, World Shabbos program. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but there is a plan, I believe, in 160 cities throughout the world for as many Jews as possible should keep Shabbos. And they did this
for that weekend.
For that Shabbos. At least start with that Shabbos. They did this almost a year ago in South Africa. It was not Lubavitch, although it seems, the reason I mention that is because Lubavitch is fantastic, and it seems like one of their mivtzaot, one of their campaigns, but it wasn't. It was a regular, not even Hasidic, Litvisher Rabbonim, regular rabbis who spearheaded this, and 35,000 South Africans, most of whom would probably not keep Shabbos, kept Shabbos. And they had a whole program where from Thursday night, they lined up tables in the street. They were given permission in the street, blocks long, to make challah for Shabbos. It was a magnificent thing. And then they ate the Shabbos meal out there as well. It was something extraordinary, really extraordinary. So we were asked to partner with other organizations to promote this. We're going to do that, and we will be in touch with you all. And we would like you not only to participate, but to be recruiters as well. It's something that's absolutely incredible. It's an international Jewish movement that keeps Shabbos, and I can think of nothing greater that we could do for our brothers and sisters in the land of Israel now who are at war. All of Israel is a miracle, just a miracle. They're surrounded by these beasts and animals who are only intent on destroying us, killing us, obliterating us, and people are sipping coffee in Dizengoff. You know, it's an amazing thing if you think about it. Who's protecting? You think that the Chayolim, who are fantastic, don't get me wrong. I stand up for a Chayol, a Jewish soldier. But that's only the protection, the physical protection that God shows us. It's God who protects us and keeps us safe. So we need the merit. Shabbos is a tremendous merit. We'd like everyone to participate. This is all of Jewry throughout the world is being asked to participate in this. Okay. Now, for our soldiers in the land of Israel now, I don't know if you're acquainted, but in yeshivas and in Jewish halls of study and in synagogues all through the world, we say Tehillim, Psalms. We're going to say one. I have two in the sheet we're going to hand out, that Mr. Frank Ross is going to hand out and has handed out. I'm going to say it in Hebrew. So if I can have one, thank you so much. I'm going to say, we'll start off with the top one, Psalm 121. I'm going to say the Hebrew, and consecutively, you will answer. But you can look at the English and say the English if you're not acquainted with the Hebrew. We're all doing this because there is a connection between every single Jew. So without further ado, please rise. We're going to say one chapter of the Hillel. Shir HaMalos, Esoy Nayel Hehovim Me'ayin Yovo Ezli. Ezli Me'im Adonai Osei Shomayim Bo'ez. Al Yitei Lamot Raglecho Al Yonum Shomlecho. Hinei Shomer Yisrael Adonai Shomecho Adonai Tzilcho Yad Yiminecho Yom HaShemesh Lo Yakecho V'yorech Baloilo Adonai Yishmorcho Mikolo Yishmor Es Nafshecho Adonai Yishmor Tzeitzcho U'oecho B'yadov Yadolo Achin Chovis Yisrael Anusul Masoro V'Shivyo Ogdin Bein Bayom Bein Bayarosho Hamotem Yirachem Aleim V'Yotziim Mitzoro V'Ilvocho U'Meyatevo V'Yolro U'Mishibut V'Dulo Hashto Bavo V'Zman Korib V'Nomar Amen. Incidentally, if you would like to keep this by all means, but please remember, it's holy writ. You can't throw it in the garbage. You can't take it into places you shouldn't take it into, and it has to be treated, with respect. So if you want it, please, we'd love for you to have it. And if you don't need it, we will take it. We will take it back, and will be collected by Mr. Frank Ross. Quickly, a few thoughts about charity before Rabbi Krohn will begin the lecture. In America, the American perspective of charity, and we are a very charitable country, by the way, the American perspective of charity is, yes, someone for money, I give at the office. Please, I give at the office. In other words, the $5 or $6 that he gives a year, he gives at the office. I don't mean to be facetious, but that, in many cases, is correct. Al Gore, the famous politician, or famous, so when he was running for office, etc., so they had to make everything transparent. So he gave $300 or $400. The man is a multi-millionaire. He gave $300 or $400 to charity. Okay? This is, and why is that? So we'll explain it in 1 second. And I don't think it would be incorrect to say that no other people can rival the Jewish nation when it comes to giving charity. No other people. But that heritage that we have that cannot be rivaled is being lost by recent generations of American Jews, and the reason is simple. Assimilation into the American culture, where at least at present, there is no obligation of one citizen to help the other. Listen what I'm saying, this is 100% correct. A guy can be a very nice guy. Gives you a, how do you do? But I have no obligation to you, just I can't do bad to you. But I have no obligation to you to help you. Judaism is different. As a national concept, which is mandated in the Bible, Judaism has an overarching concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelozeh. Each Jew is a guarantor for every other Jew. In other words, every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. And you have to love your fellow Jew as you love yourself. That means you have to help them. You have to help them. And as the verses in the source sheets cry out, We're going to have it in a second, but just the fourth thought. If there is among you anyone in need, a member of your community in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You shall rather open your hand willingly, lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. That's not a government responsibility. That's an individual citizen responsibility of the Jewish people toward other Jews. That's a responsibility. It's a mandated responsibility. That's a whole different type. It's a whole different concept, in caring about another person. That's what we have to do as Jews. Okay? And there's another thing that we have to understand is the money we have is not ours. God gives it to us. You never heard of anyone losing their money? We all know that. You can lose your money in a second. A market crash, the stock you bought, boom. Your job doesn't exist anymore. We like you a lot, but we have a guy who does it in Pakistan for 1/10 the cost. It's only a gift. Parnasa, livelihood, is only a gift. And God says, I want to give you that gift. And test me with that gift, as very Krohn, I'm sure, will bring out. Test me with that gift. You're allowed to test God. If you give charity, He will give you back. You can test God with that. How many people, they get a call that they just won a lottery or a raffle, and they can't believe it. And how many people find that the furnace failed and it's going to cost them $10,000? It's all in the hands of God. He gave us the money. Do with it the right thing that He tells us to do. Now, we have a tremendous honor tonight that we have a young but tremendously scholarly speaker and Jew with a tremendous heart. He comes from a family of Jews who are always caring about other Jews. And it is my great, great privilege to introduce this young scholar to speak for us, Rabbi Eliezer Krohn.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Rabbi Khan. The Khan family and myself go way, way back. Rabbi Khan and Rabbi and Mrs. Khan's son, Yosef Khan, those of you who know him, growing up we were best friends and we're very, very close. I remember in the beginning when I used to call the Khan's house to just speak to Yosef, we want to come over and play, or play basketball. So they used to pick up the phone, hello, Center for Return. And I used to hang up because I thought I had the wrong number. But the Khans give up their house for Center for Return. They give over all their strength and their time for Center for Return, the great work that they do. And Hashem should bless them that they should be able to continue for many more years to do the great work. Tonight's topic of tzedakah and meiser, giving charity and giving meiser, which we'll talk about, is, as Rabbi Khan mentioned, a very important mitzvah in the Torah. And as you found on your source sheets, there are several verses in the Torah that tell us that a person must give charity. One of them is a pasuk in Parshas Bahar, if your brother is poor and they need your help, you should strengthen them. Several verses in the Torah that tell us that a person should give charity, and because of that, the Rishonim tell us that that is one of the 613 mitzvos. As you know, there are 613 mitzvos.
What are Rishonim?
The Rishonim, the scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim, the wise scholars that lived from approximately the 1200s to the 1500s, a lot of halacha, approximately, maybe a little bit earlier, perhaps a little bit later, but most of the halacha that we have generates from the scholars in those times, and they tell us, when they list the 613 positive commandments in the Torah, they list giving charity as one of the positive commandments. We will see in a moment how exactly do you fill that commandment, but that is regular commandment in the Torah. So much so that there is even a question, why don't we make a blessing when we give charity? I'm sure you all know that many commandments that we do, we make a blessing before we do that commandment. When we eat matzah on Pesach, we make a blessing, a special blessing besides the hamotzi, but we make a blessing on the mitzvah that we do. Various answers, why don't we make a blessing on charity? One of the answers given is that it's something logical. It's something that's obvious. Even non-Jews would perform such a mitzvah. They should want to do that. When we make a blessing on a mitzvah, we say a phrase that you're familiar with, Asher kidshanu b'mitzvosav, that God sanctified us with His mitzvos, and He commanded us to do X, Y, and Z. One of the answers given, we don't need to say that God sanctified us to give charity. Logically, the non-Jews should want to give charity as well. As Rabbi Krohn mentioned, many times they don't. But it's something logical, and there are various mitzvos that we do not make a blessing on because it's just something logical. Honoring your father or mother. There's no blessing on that mitzvah because that is also something logical. When we say that a person has to give charity, so if I know of a poor individual, which in Hebrew is called an ani, I know he lives on the other end of the world. I am not obligated to necessarily run after him and give him all my money. As a whole, the community, a person is obligated to chip in as part of the community and give towards that person. There is something that's called ani kamoi, which you may have read about in the source sheets, and that means that if I have a poor individual in front of me, a poor man comes over to me, and let's assume for now that I know the individual and I know that he's telling the truth and that he's a poor individual. If he comes over to me and asks me for money, and I harden my heart, as Rabbi Krohn mentioned before, I harden my heart and I do not give him charity, there the Torah tells us that not only didn't I get the mitzvah of giving charity, but I transgress a negative commandment as well. That negative commandment, Rabbi Krohn read from the source sheets, a person should not harden their heart and not give to your brother. Because of that, a lot of times you'll be praying in the synagogue and you'll see somebody in the lobby, or you'll see somebody come over to the men in the shul, in the synagogue, asking for money. And a lot of times we don't give. Very possible, it's a huge discussion amongst the rabbis, very possible that every single time a poor individual comes over to you and asks for money and a person does not give, they can be transgressing that negative commandment. Now, if a person didn't realize this was the law, then of course it's very different than if somebody does it on purpose. Maybe I should never have told you this. But that is the law according to many opinions. Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the great poskim, the Torah scholars that we had, he actually lived in Manhattan in the previous generation, he says like that. And he says, even if a person has given already 10%, which we'll discuss more, has given 10% of his earnings to charity, but if a poor individual comes face to face and asks for charity, a person must give. They could give a quarter, they could give a dime, but they should give something. Let's say you get something in the mail. You get something in the mail. I know today, just alone today, I got 3 envelopes in the mail asking for charity for certain organizations that are collecting for poor people. The poskim tell us, poskim? The halachic deciders tell us that quite possibly that is also considered as if you have a poor individual in front of you. Even though the person is not literally in front of you, but you know about it, you have gotten something in the mail, right? Yeah, exactly. I saw you have a stack of envelopes, and very possible it will be nice. You know, it may not be worth it to spend a check and just giving $1, but just to not give anything should preferably not be done. Something should be given, otherwise a person can be running into trouble that they can transgress one of those negative commandments. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us that there are 3 levels to giving charity. I'm sure some of you saw this in the source sheets. There are 3 levels to giving charity. One level is to give 20% of what you own, 1/5. That's the highest level. We'll talk about that more maybe a little bit later. The highest level is to give 20% of what you own. That is a very, very high level, and that is not required.
What you
Or you
earn.
earn. We'll get to find what you earn. We'll get to that. But that is not required. That's a very high level, but that's not required. The second level, second to best, is to give 10% of what you earn. Definitely we'll talk about that more. And the lowest level is to give what's called, in Hebrew it's called, the person needs to give 1/3 of a shekel. Now, what that comes out to us nowadays, 1/3 of a shekel is 84 cents. A person needs to give 84 cents per year to charity. If a person does not give 84 cents a year, I sure hope we all over here give 84 cents a year to charity. Somebody who does not give 84 cents of a year to charity, then they have transgressed, they have not fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. Once you have given 84 cents a year to charity, then you have fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. We'll discuss how much of an obligation do I have to give 10%. But the basics is 84%. Usually, we all give that and we're not transgressing, not giving charity, unless you have the situation we discussed before that the poor individual is in front of you. That is the foundation. That's the basics of the mitzvah of tzedakah. Now let's discuss different, more detailed areas of tzedakah. Question? Only on what we said already, because I'm going to be covering a lot of different things.
Could you define what charity is only given to a poor person or organization?
Oh, very good, good. Oh, good. We're going to talk about that. We're going to cover everything as much as we can until 8:10. It's an excellent question. Who is considered an ani? Who is considered a poor individual? So, it says in the Mishnah and in the Gemara that there was a system, there used to be a system based on the year. There used to be a system that they used to collect money in the town. Details that we don't need to get into. There was also what's called leket, shikha, and peah. Also, we don't need to get into that. But they had a system where they gathered money for the poor individuals. What the Gemara says and what the Mishnah tells us is that if a person owns 200 zuz, the zuz was a coin that they had in those days. If a person owned 200 zuz, then they were no longer entitled to accept charity. They weren't considered poor anymore. 200 zuz or more, then they were not considered a poor individual. 199 zuz or less, then they were considered a poor individual. Those of you who are familiar with what's called gematria. Gematria means a numerical value. All the Hebrew letters in the alphabet have a numerical value. The numerical value of the word tzedakah, for charity, is 199. 199, because if a person has 199 zuz or less, they are allowed to get charity. That's the marsha in Payah. That's if a person, how much they own. If a person owns less than that, they own 50 zuz, but they are able to go ahead and work. A lot of people, they have the health and they're able to go out and get a job and they're able to start a business. There, if they have 50 zuz, then they're able to start a business with that, and that's not considered that I can give them charity. How does that play out nowadays? The numbers 200 zuz and 50 zuz don't apply to us nowadays. Therefore, the halacha is that if a person has enough money to support him and his family for 1 year, then he is not considered a poor individual. If he has enough money to support him and his family, depends how many children he has, him and his family, or if he's not married, so alone, if he has enough money to support himself for a year, then he's not considered a poor individual. Or if he has enough money that he can start a business. He's able to start a business with less than that, that's what's similar to the 50, then he is also no longer considered a poor individual. He can go get a job with the amount of money, nothing to do with 50 nowadays. I don't know, your guess would be as good as mine. If a person has enough money that he can start a business, then he needs to go out and get a job, and he cannot collect charity. Now, what you all want to know is, let's say he says, well, man, I can't, my back hurts, and he's a lazy person, and he has enough money to go out and get a job, but he's just not interested. He just wants to sit back and collect charity. So there, he cannot collect charity. If the truth of the matter is that he can go out and get a job, then he cannot collect charity. And the place can tell us, Rav Scheiber, who was a great halacha decider in Israel, he says that if a person is clinically depressed, he says, then that's considered as if he can't work. You can't tell a person, clinically depressed, come on, snap out of it, go, get with it and go get a job. No, if a person is clinically depressed, then that's considered as if he can't work. And if he can't work and he doesn't have enough money to support himself and he can't go work, then he would be classified as a poor person. Fine, I think that's enough as far as what's considered a poor individual. Because of the short of time, I'm going to have to leave out a lot of different parts. I'm just trying to decide quickly which parts should be left out. The place can tell us also another situation. Let's say a person has enough money, but something comes up. Something comes up. He all of a sudden has to take care of medical expenses, or he has to make a wedding. It could be a happy reason, or it could be a sad reason. And now all of a sudden he needs $30,000 to make a wedding, or unfortunately a medical situation, and now he needs a lot of money. That person can also, that money can be considered towards charity, even though technically he has enough money to support himself for the year, but now all of a sudden something arose and something came up, that money can be considered to be given to charity. What about a child? What about a child? Can I give charity to a child? A child has a bank account of 0. So, he's a poor individual. Can I give charity to a child? So the answer is the following. If he's being supported by his parents, then he's not considered a poor individual, even though he's so proud of his piggy bank that he has $1, but that doesn't mean that he's a poor individual. His parents are taking care of him. Let's say his parents have enough money, but they don't want to spend the money on their children. There's something that their child needs. They need braces. They need to go to camp, to be part of society. You need to go to a regular day camp once school is over in the summer. But the parents don't want to do it. Maybe they're cheapskates. Maybe they convince themselves that they need to save the money. You can give that money. That is considered towards charity. If you go over to the family and say, listen, I know your child needs this and this and this. I'm willing to pay for it. I have more money than you, I understand, I'm willing to pay for it. That money can be considered charity because the child, of course, can't take care of it himself. He doesn't have any money. For whatever reason, maybe the parents are wrong for doing so. But the fact of the matter is that the parents deny their child what the child needs, then that would be considered charity. Sometimes it's hard to decide what's considered a necessity, what's considered a luxury. Let's say the child wants, some extra video game and the parents don't want to give it, so that's not considered charity because if you buy it for him. But something that's considered a necessity, the person may need to ask a question at the time, what's considered a necessity, but a child that, in such a case, a child can be considered that he is poor. Can I give charity to a non-Jew? Am I allowed to give charity to a non-Jew? I'm walking in the street and say it's a homeless individual or whatever the situation is, a poor man that's a non-Jew asks me for tzedakah. Am I allowed to give that towards tzedakah? And does that count as charities? I believe it was on your source sheets. And the halacha is that you are allowed to give to a non-Jew. And the reason is what's called darchei shalom, which means that it's to cause peace. If the non-Jews would see that the Jews don't give them charity, that would make them upset. That would cause hatred, and it would be a chilul Hashem, it would be a desecration of Hashem's name. Oh, look, the Jews don't support us, the Jews don't give us. That would not be something that we want between the non-Jews and the Jewish people, and because of that, you are allowed to give charity to a non-Jew. What about the following situation? Let's say it's not a non-Jew comes over and asks for charity. It's a mass collection. They're collecting for some big organization, but it's all for non-Jews. Over there, there is no desecration of Hashem's name. If you see some type of charity box, and it's giving some charity to some organization for non-Jews, collecting for poor individuals, but they're non-Jews, there wouldn't be any hatred, right? Because they don't know who passed that, that charity box and didn't give. That is a big discussion in the halacha deciders. Rav Moshe Feinstein once again seems to say that you are allowed to give charity in such a case, even though it wouldn't be a desecration to Hashem's name if you don't give. Still, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, they feel you are allowed to give such a case. So basically, it comes out you would always be allowed to give to a non-Jew, and sometimes it can cause even a very what's called the Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify Hashem's name, because they see that the Jewish people, they're charitable and they give and they're nice to other people, even to non-Jews, if anything, that could spread Hashem's name in a nice way. A person would be allowed to give to a non-Jew, to give charity. As I'm sure some of you saw on the sheets, there's an order of what preference a person should give, who a person should give charity to. Now, we're not going to get into all the details of that halacha, but the truth is that the best person to give charity to is not only a poor person, but a poor person that studies Torah. And that is clear in the halacha, that if you have a poor person that studies Torah, that would be the best individual to give tzedakah to. Second best is an organization that spreads Torah, that learns Torah, like a yeshiva, like an organization, like Center for Return, that is for the study of Torah and spreads the study of Torah. The study of Torah is the highest mitzvah a person can do, and even if a person is not able to or doesn't have the time, or even if they do study Torah, supporting the study of Torah is the highest level of charity. So yes, it's important to give to poor people, but the best is poor people that study Torah, and if not, for an organization that enhances the study of Torah, like a yeshiva, like a Beis Yaakov. In that, there's many details. Let's say a person has a poor friend, then that has a preference. Let's say a person has a poor parent or a poor brother. Those all have preferences over a poor stranger. There's preferences to poor people that live in your city or poor people that live in Eretz Yisrael, that live in Israel. Those are all details as far as the preferences, but it's important to know that giving charity, like you pointed out before, you want to know what is considered charity, giving to organizations like a kiruv organization or a Beis Yaakov or yeshiva, that does have the halachic status of tzedakah, even if they're not poor individuals. Yeah.
So how does that work if the people that they're benefiting aren't poor? But obviously they're spreading Torah. What's the source?
So that is,
that would be considered tzedakah.
That would be considered tzedakah. That has the halachic status of tzedakah. It's towards the spread of Torah, and we'll discuss a little bit later as far as other mitzvahs, not the mitzvah of spreading Torah, but let's say giving money towards a different mitzvah, does that have the classification of tzedakah? But for sure, towards the study of Torah, that would have the classification of charity. The charity is not only to poor people. The poskim tell us that it's also towards the study of Torah, even if the individuals are not necessarily poor. Now, many times, the individuals, what's called a kola. So it's important to know as far as both sides. Let's say a person is able to work, they're able to go out and get a job, but they decide, you know what, I'm not going to get a job. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to study Torah all day. Now I'm sure you all know that there are such institutions. There are many yeshivas that the students learning in the yeshiva are married, and they have a wife, and they have children, and they don't have a job. What's their job? Their job is to study Torah. So the halacha is clear that that is also considered somebody that can accept tzedakah. And Rav Moshe Feinstein again tells us that that is the highest level of tzedakah. The Chavez tells us as well, that is the highest level of tzedakah, somebody that technically could go get a job, but he decides not to get a job. Rather, I will accept money from tzedakah. Now, you might think, well, that's odd. Why are you collecting money from tzedakah? Go get a job and support yourself. But since they decide to study Torah, they do have a right to accept tzedakah. Yeah.
No, I think if I may just clarify his question, Eric's question, is how does that come under, you're saying it does come under the umbrella of charity, but why does it come under the umbrella of charity? So the answer is, if I may just pipe up for a second,
please.
The answer is, from the question, from the fact, you see what the answer is. You have any problem thinking of someone who donates a hospital, that's charity? No, because the community need. The community cannot survive without a hospital, right? So Jews, the nation Israel, and the entire universe, but we won't get into Kabbalistic, really big picture concepts. But the Jewish people cannot exist without Torah. Period. That's a fact. A human being can't exist without air. Jews cannot exist, and the whole universe cannot exist without Torah being learned. So then it's a hospital. I mean, it's the greatest hospital, the greatest the need of the community, the greatest need of the universe.
And the best, the highest level is when you have both of those together. You have the people studying the Torah and somebody that is a poor individual. But yes, even if a person is theoretically not poor, if a person gives towards such an institution, that, like Rabbi Krohn is expressing very well, that has the halachic status of what's considered charity. As we touched upon before, and this is a lot of the questions that I emailed in advance, about the mitzvah of Meiser. We'll see if we have time for other topics. We'll go back if we have time for that. The topic of Meiser. Meiser means 10%. Meiser means 10%. And there is, as we mentioned before, there's a higher level of not just regularly giving charity, but to give 10% of your earnings, and we'll discuss how do I calculate that exactly, towards Meiser, towards tzedakah. Now, tzedakah is, as we mentioned before, Meiser tells us how much tzedakah. It is a higher level to give 10% of your earnings towards charity, towards poor individuals, towards Torah study, to give 10% of your earnings. First, there's a great discussion. How much of an obligation is this to give 10% of your earnings? Those of you familiar with what it says in the Torah, in the times when most of the people were farmers. So we had something that was called Meiser Ani, there was Meiser Sheni, many different 10% that we needed to give. And that was, the Torah talks about giving 10% of your crops towards poor individuals. And there's a discussion, there are those that say that even nowadays, even for our money, that is also a Torah obligation. A Torah obligation to give 10%, not only the 84 cents, but to give 10% of your earnings towards charity. Many assume that it is not a Torah obligation. There are those that say it's only a rabbinic obligation. There's a third level, and this is how we generally assume, and that is that it is a minhag. A minhag means a custom, a strong custom, to give 10% of your earnings towards charity. And it's very widely accepted. The Chavez discusses this, of Moshe Feinstein and many others, of Chaim Kanevsky, that although giving 10% of your earnings is not a Torah obligation, the Torah obligation is only 84 cents a year, but it is a very special mitzvah to give 10% of your earnings towards Meiser, towards charity. And like I said before, charity has its mitzvah by itself. The discussion of Meiser is how much to give 10% of your earnings. Now, as Rabbi Krohn mentioned before, and it was on the source sheets, the Torah tells us that a person is generally not allowed to test Hashem. It's a pasuk that says you are not supposed to test Hashem. Meaning I say out loud that I'm going to do this and this mitzvah, and I want to see if Hashem rewards me for that. I'm testing Hashem to see if He gives me a reward for doing that mitzvah. You are not supposed to do that. There's only one exception to that. The one mitzvah that you are allowed to test Hashem is the mitzvah of Meiser. Not so much for tzedakah, but for Meiser. When you give 10%, the Torah, the Pasuk in Malachi, guarantees that a person would become rich. A person will become rich if they give 10% of their earnings towards charity. And the Torah tells us, Uv'chanuni navazos, please test me. Hashem remarks, please test me. If you give 10% of your earnings, I will open up the windows from the heavens and you will become rich. Now, a great question that I'm sure you're all wondering is, wait a second, I give 10% of my earnings and I'm not so rich. And the commentaries all discuss why is that the case. We find so many people that they're so careful to give 10% of their earnings and it seems as if they're not rich. One of the many answers given,
I don't think that many people that are so careful to give 10%. Please forgive me.
okay?
Please forgive me. And I know people who do give a lot of charity, and they are rewarded.
Okay.
Rewarded.
Definitely.
I have to tell you,
Okay,
I think
good.
that
So that's what the
who-
Torah is telling us, that if a person really is careful and makes sure to give 10% of their earnings, a person has to have a notebook, has to have keep what we call a cheshbon, you have to calculate to make sure, but maybe you're right, that if a person really is particular to give 10%, they would have that guarantee to become rich. So by all means, it's definitely a very good idea, a very good investment for ourselves, not only in the next world, but even in this world, to be careful to give the 10%. But because of that, we need to know how exactly to calculate that 10%. And that is the following. A person only needs to give 10% from the assets, from what they gain over all their expenses. What do I mean by that? Meaning if I have a job, but I needed to go to college to get that job. And let's say college cost me, just choosing an easy number, $10,000. The first $10,000, I'm just choosing an easy number. Let's say it's 10,000. You want to talk 20,000? Fine. But just an easy number, 10,000. The first $10,000 that I make, I do not need to give 10% from that money. Since I had to spend the money in the first place, so now I am like minus 10,000. The first $10,000 that I make, I do not need to take off 10% from those earnings. Now, a person needs to have an exact calculation if you want to make sure you are giving Meiser correctly. Other expenses as well. If you need to travel a lot for the purpose of business, and you need to buy plane tickets, or you need to put gas in your car, pay for tolls, any expense that you have in your business, you need supplies, many times you need to spend money for your business. Over there as well, you do not need to give 10% from such, if you make money, that amount of money that you spend. For example, let's say I needed to spend $1,000 on a plane ticket and a hotel, because I had to travel to California for a business trip. So I had to spend $1,000. I made the business deal, and then I made $10,000. So I do not need to give 10% of the $10,000, which would be $1,000. I only need to give 10% from $9,000. Since I had to spend $1,000 in order to make that $10,000, so I only need to give 10% from what I made. So too, if I needed to buy a special car, if I needed to buy special clothing, sometimes it's difficult to know. Clothing is something that I needed to buy anyways. So I needed to buy something extra nice because I have a special business meeting. So I would have had to buy something anyways, so you have to maybe calculate the difference. Sometimes it's not so simple to know. Let's say I want to travel to California for a business trip. But once I'm there, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'll go to Disney World, Disneyland. Disneyland is in California, Disney World's in Florida. So once I'm there, I'll go travel. I'll go enjoy myself as a vacation. So, of course, the money that I spend in Disneyland cannot be taken off the calculation. Let's say I'm going because I want to go to Disneyland. Once I'm there, I'll do some business. But I really went to go to Disneyland. So then none of that expense can be taken off from the Meiser because I really went for a vacation. A person needs to know, let's say you go for both reasons as together. There a person would have to know, and maybe perhaps a person would have to ask a question at the time, do they need to give Meiser from that? Let's say a person gets a gift. Somebody gives you a gift. A nice friend of yours gives you a gift. Do you need to give 10% from that earnings? Generally speaking, 10% would be needed to be given from all earnings that you make. Not only from your job, from your business, also from an inheritance. A person is very sad that their parents pass away, but the fact of the matter is that they get an inheritance, and they get whatever money that they inherit from their parents. They need to give 10% to charity. If you have that custom of giving Meiser, a person needs to give 10%. Any benefit, any earnings that they make. If they find $100 on the floor in the street, and the halacha is that you are allowed to keep it, let's assume, so a person needs to give 10% to charity. Let's say a person gets a gift. Somebody gives you a gift, whether it's for a birthday, a bar mitzvah boy, or a wedding gift, something like that. Does a person need to give 10% of that gift? So there's two types of gifts. Let's say you get money as a gift. Okay? So the halacha is the following. This is very, very important, especially when it comes from parents. A lot of children take money from their parents. The parents, I don't mean take, I mean the parents give them money. Does a person need to give 10% from the money that their parents give them? Whether they're in kollel, like we were talking about before, do they need to give 10% from that money? And the answer is the following. First we're going to discuss money, then we'll talk about an object as a gift. As far as money, the answer is like this. The answer is yes. You do need to give 10% from that because you got it, you earned it, it was something that you earned, whether you deserve it or not, but it's something that you got, you need to give 10%, except in the following situation. Let's say I want to give you a gift. You're a good friend of mine, I give you $100, go enjoy yourself, go spend some money, here's $100. But you say, no, wait a second, I have to give 10% to charity. I have to give $10 of it to charity. And I would say, no, I'm all for charity. Charity's great, but I didn't give you $100 to spend $90. I gave you $100 because I want you to have $100. I don't want you to spend $10 of it on giving to charity. Give charity from other money, for sure. But when I'm giving you $100 or $1,000 or $2,000, I don't want you to have to give 10% to charity. If the giver of the gift does not want you to give 10% to charity, then you do not have to give to charity, and you do not want, and you are not allowed to give that to charity. Most of the time, when somebody gives you a gift, if you would say, wow, that's really nice, thank you very much, okay, but I'm just going to give 10% to charity, the person's not going to be happy. I didn't give you money, I'm not giving you money from my pocket so you can give charity, I'll give charity, you'll give charity, but I'm giving you money because I want you to have all of it. If that's a situation that you do not need to give 10% from that money, because I wanted you to have all of the money for yourself. The same way I can make a condition. I'm giving you a $100 gift on the condition that you don't spend it on pizza. I don't know, I could say whatever I want. I'm only giving you the money on that condition. I'm giving you the money on the condition that you don't give charity from that money. What about from a parent? Hold on one second, let me just say from a parent and then I'll take your question. What about from a parent? So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who passed away a little more than 15 years ago, so he was a great, great halacha decider in Israel, and he says the following: if the parents give to their children for something specific, then the children do not need to give 10% to charity. For example, the parents pay the children's mortgage, or the parents pay the children's tuition, the parents pay the children's rent, or their lease on their car, something specific. I'm giving you money for that. I'm not giving you the money to spend on groceries. I'm giving you the money to spend for your mortgage. Then the halacha is that they do not need to give 10% to charity, even though they got it from their parents, but it was for something specific. Similar to what we said before. I didn't give this to you to keep 90% and 10% to charity. They keep all of it and they use it for whatever the parents wanted them to use it for. If it was spending money, here, the parents love the children, we assume, and they just give some money, here, go, enjoy yourself, use it for whatever you want, use it for groceries, use it for this, use it for that, it's up to you, here, go, here's some money. There they would have to give 10% to Meiser, unless the parents don't want them to, unless the parents say, no, keep all of it, I want you to have this spending money. Unless they say specifically, I don't want you to give 10%, but if it's not for something specific, then we would say that that's just like a regular gift, that generally a person would need to give 10% from a gift. Now it may depend how much. If I give you a $10 gift, you're a good friend of mine, here's $10. So $1 you give a dollar to charity, I don't mind. You want to give a dollar to tzedakah, that's fine with me. But if I give you 1,000, I don't want you to give 100. It may very well depend on the amount. Any question before?
So you're doing a person a service or a disservice if you say not to give?
Excellent question. It's an excellent question. A woman called me last week with this exact question, and we had that discussion. His question was like, if I tell the person, here's $500, but you don't have to give 50 to charity. You keep all 500 for yourself. So in a way, you're doing them a service because they get to keep all of it, but in a way, you're holding them back from the mitzvah of tzedakah. Now, technically, to get around it, what a person can do is say, okay, fine, I'm keeping all $500, all five $100 bills that you give me, I'm keeping all of it, and I'm going to take $50 out of my other pocket and give it to tzedakah. There, the person will be keeping the service for themselves. They're not going to have to tell the person that they did that, but you are making a good point that you think, oh, I'm doing you a favor by telling you not, but you're right. I am holding a person back from doing that mitzvah, but they could also circumvent it by getting around it. Let's say, yeah, very quickly.
I don't know if they thought about the United States tax code when they made these laws, but are you supposed to be considering before or after tax money?
Oh, very good. We're going to get to that. Okay. All taxes that a person needs to pay also does come off the Meiser Cheshbon, which means that if, just again, using some easy numbers, I make $10,000. I earn profit, $10,000, but $1,000 of it I need to give to taxes, then I only need to give 10% from 9,000. I do not need to give 10% from 10,000. Since some of it needed to go towards taxes, that's not considered my profit. I only need to give 10% from my profit.
But if you give $900 to a charity in this country, you'd also be getting back a tax benefit, so it really may only cost you $450.
Okay, so you're right. It would have.
You're supposed to give.
Moshe has a tshuva on that exactly.
Okay.
There's a responsa in where Moshe Feinstein that, and Moshe says that you don't have to calculate that. In other words, you're getting you give 900, you're getting a benefit. That benefit is you don't have to consider that benefit.
Very good. Look it up.
Because he says the tovas hano is yours. I'll explain it
afterwards. Okay, we're running out of time. We're almost finished. Okay, very good. Let's say I get a gift, not a money gift, but a monetary gift, but an object. So many different opinions in the poskim. There's 4 different opinions. You would think, well, it's either yes or no. Let's say you give me a gift, an object as a gift. Do I need to give 10% of that gift to charity? So how can we get 4 different opinions? One opinion is that yes, you have to estimate how much that object is worth. Let's say you give me an object that's worth $100. So opinion number 1 is that I have to give $10 to charity. Another opinion is that it depends if I would have bought it anyways. Is it something that I didn't really need and I would not have bought it? Or is it something that, yeah, I would have bought and now you saved me the fact that I don't need to buy it? I do not want to get into the details of that. It's confusing and we're running out of time. We paskin that on an object as a gift, you do not need to give meiser. That's the way the Chazon Ish paskins, that many other poskim say that if you get an object as a gift, you do not need to calculate 10%. That's very important to know as far as wedding gifts. And this is what my Rosh Yeshiva, my Rabbi, told me. I learned in Sharon Torah in Kew Gardens of Common Abstinence. He told me that on wedding gifts that I get objects that probably still sitting in my basement, but they're the objects, these trays and silver dishes, you do not need to give 10% of that by a gift. I'll tell you a very interesting question. Very interesting question that one of my students asked me. I taught these halachos of tzedakah and meiser in a seminary in Borough Park this past year. I didn't rush it all in 45 minutes. We spread it out over a few weeks. But one of my students asked me from a different school that I teach, and I wasn't even teaching these halachos. She said the following, very quickly. She said she was a mother's helper, which means that she helped a family take care of the children. What was her payment? This family went to Israel. And they had little children, and there's a lot of walking in Israel. So her payment was that they paid for her ticket to Israel. And they didn't pay her 1 penny, but they just paid for her ticket to Israel, and she got to go to Israel for free. She didn't have to pay for the ticket. She went to Israel, and her job was to help with the children, but her payment was that she now got to go to Israel. For her, it was for sure worth it. She was able to go to Israel, and she went to touring with them, and she went to the Kosa with them. Does she have to give 10% of the ticket or what she would have paid? A discussion, maybe we could talk about that afterwards. Let's just finalize the 2 final questions in regards to meiser. Who can meiser be given to? So we said before that meiser can be given to poor individuals, it can be given to Torah institutions. What about tuition? Tuition. So I send my children to a school. That money that I pay tuition is going to a Torah organization. Can that be taken off meiser? No, you're saying no way. No. So what it depends on is the following. For my sons, we say generally it cannot be taken off meiser. I have an obligation to teach my sons Torah. I have an obligation. Now, I learn with them. I definitely learn with them as much as I can, but I don't teach them the full amount that they need to learn. I rely on the school to do that. So I have an obligation to send my boys to yeshiva, because I'm not doing it myself, so I have an obligation to send my boys to yeshiva. I have to pay them for that. So the payment that I give to the yeshiva cannot be considered charity. That's an obligation that I have. I am obligated to do that, and therefore that money cannot be considered charity, the tuition that I pay. What about for the girls? There's really no obligation to teach your girls Torah. Can that money be considered tzedakah when I decide to send them to a Beis Yaakov, and now I give the Beis Yaakov whatever amount of money, and can that money be considered towards charity? That is a great discussion. Rav Moshe Feinstein, once again, he says that that cannot be considered charity, even the girls. Why? He says because even if you're not obligated to teach them Torah, but you're obligated to raise them as proper Jews. And because of that, you need to send them to a Beis Yaakov. What are the other options? You can't send them to a non-Jewish school, so you must send them to a Jewish school, even though you don't have an obligation of teaching them Torah per se. Because of that, he says that that also cannot be considered for tuition. Now, could be considered towards Meiser. Now, I'm not sure where this falls in as far as homeschooling. I was always bothered with this tshuva from Rav Moshe, and I did see a sefer from Simcha ben Krohn, who's a Talmid Chacham from Lakewood. He also asked the question. There is such an